Of his life, President Kennedy tells us about the Cuban missiles and scares us.
And I called in the network representatives, and I said, we want a half an hour tonight at 7 o'clock. And I said, what? They said, what for? And I said, for a matter of high national security.
That same night in
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
A strict quarantine on all offensive military equipment under shipment to Cuba is being initiated. It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union.
the White House press room is packed. One of the reporters, ABC's John Scally.
I remember the reporters who were watching the speech with me at the White House when the president came to that part, looking at one another and sort of gulping and knowing that this was a crisis of historic and life and death dimensions.
No one can foresee precisely what course it will take, or what costs or casualties will be incurred. But the greatest danger of all would be to do nothing.
Watching television, some of us worried that there was nothing we could do. Here at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, the big news of the week had been that Joey D and the Starlighters would play at homecoming. And then the president spoke. We watched, sitting around the dorm in our Madras wraparound skirts, our Bass-Weegian loafers, and our circle pins. And when the president was done, we rushed to the telephone to call our parents to ask what we ought to do if bombs started falling. For those living closer to Cuba, it was worse.
And my number is Beechwood 45789.
In Miami, disc jockey Rick Shaw is taking requests and playing the hits.
I guess the emotion that comes back to mind is one of intense patriotism, and I remember that very clearly. It was the first time and the only time in the 26 years that I've been playing music in South Florida. After the speech, I got a call and a request for the national anthem.
Lincoln, the 23rd.
Quarantine is translated into an official proclamation, fixing the 0 hour, 10 a.m., New York time, Wednesday, October 24th. It is signed John Fitzgerald Kennedy.
Wednesday, October 24th. The naval blockade is now in place.
The Soviet ship was moving toward that line and clearly would cross it if it continued moving the next day. So I said to George, Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Anderson, George, what are you going to do when that Soviet ship hits that line? He says, damn it, we're going to stop it. What else do you think we're going to do? I said, let me tell you something. You're not going to fire any shot against that tanker with the possibility that it'll blow the damn thing up, and that this will be the start of war between the Soviet Union and the U.S. without my permission, and I'm not going to give you my permission without the president's permission. Now, do you understand that?
And order vulnerable, low-flying reconnaissance planes to check out the Cuban sites. The mission leader is Navy Captain William Ecker.
We manned our airplanes. There were 6 of us, 3 sections of two each. We each had a wingman, and we hit our burners, took off. I guess the best way to phrase the altitudes that we used in this were treetop level and very fast. And all of a sudden, this stuff started to appear. And again, I couldn't identify things like you see in the pictures now, but it was there, and I could see camouflage netting and so forth over it. We were able to, as I say, pin old Castro's hide to the bulkhead there.
Ecker's pictures confirm the worst. The missile sites are nearly complete, the anti-aircraft guns are in place, and there are soldiers to man those guns. Thursday, October 25th. In the UN Security Council, Ambassador Adlai Stevenson, at his most acerbic, confronts Soviet Ambassador Zorin.
Let me ask you one simple question. Do you, Ambassador Zorin, deny that the USSR has placed and is placing medium and intermediate range missiles and sites in Cuba? Yes or no? Don't wait for the translation, yes or no?
I am not in an American courtroom, sir.
and therefore I do not wish to answer a question that is put to me in the fashion in which a prosecutor does. In due course, sir, you will have your reply.
I'm prepared to wait for my answer until hell freezes over, if that's your decision.
Everybody's doing a brand new dance now. Come on, baby, do the locomotion. I know you.
Fear of war is almost tangible. People who didn't know or didn't care where their neighborhood fallout shelters were suddenly are desperate to find out. Wilhelmina Harvey's husband was the mayor of Key West.
And the grocery stores were running out of groceries, particularly the little independent grocery stores. And we were going in and buying as many of the canned goods as we could buy, candles, kerosene for our old kerosene lamps. And it was a crisis in our lives, just as if a hurricane were brewing.
There were some railroad tracks that I had to go past every night on my way home. I'd never seen a train on those tracks. And I'm going home, and all of a sudden I see the gates coming to us. What is this? You know? And I was the first one right up against the gate, and as the train came by, it's got tanks and soldiers.
And most of these big missiles went on the beach. And they were cordoned off with rows and rows of wire, barbed wire. And then the hotel, which had been closed and weeds were growing, why, that became the headquarters for most of the troops.
Friday, October 26th, sailors from the destroyer Joseph Kennedy Jr. board a Soviet ship. No contraband. A few hours later, a long, rambling message from Nikita Khrushchev himself seems to propose a deal. The Soviets apparently will pull out the missiles if Kennedy promises not to invade Cuba. Scally, the middleman, tells his KGB contact that the solution would be acceptable.
I'm not.
Saturday, October 27th. Suddenly, the crisis fever is higher than ever. A U-2 is shot down over Cuba. The pilot, Major Rudolph Anderson, is killed. And a second, more strident note is received from Khrushchev with unacceptable demands. Now he wants the U.S. to remove its Jupiter missiles from Turkey as a condition for a Soviet pullout from Cuba.
For a while, they didn't know how to deal with that. I mean, which of these messages do you accept? And it was Robert Kennedy who had, I think, was a brilliant idea. He said, let's assume we didn't get the second message. Let's just answer the first message. And that's what we did.
The president wanted to...
A White House aide gives Pierre Salinger an envelope, instructions for his family if Washington has to be evacuated.
If we have to go to that step, your family should open this envelope, which will tell them where your wife and children should go in case of that emergency. And of course, getting that envelope really gave you the impression that, I mean, we were headed for the abyss. We were headed for a disaster.
October 28th, faced with Kennedy's resolve and the threat of nuclear war, Khrushchev decides the Cuban missiles aren't worth it and backs down.
We have instructed our officers to take proper measures to stop the construction of installations, dismantle them, and bring them back to the Soviet Union.
Now I cross over to meet the president for the 10 o'clock mass, and as he stepped into the car, into the White House limousine, he said, Dave, this morning we have an extra reason to pray.